Really glad to be here and share a little bit about my experiences with you. This is a small setting, so it doesn't matter if you have questions and you want to ask them at any time, just stop me. Think of this more as like a conversation than me just rambling on and on and on. Quick about my background. I grew up in Maine, went to the Naval Academy, went to BUDS, from BUDS to SDB Team 2, SDB, Dry Deck Shelter Platoon, if anybody even knows what that is in this room, for 2 years, and SDB Platoon for 2 years, and then I went to graduate school in Boston for 2 years, moved out to the West Coast to San Diego, SEAL Team 3 for 2 years, and then back here to Special Boat Team 20 where I was Ops and XO, and during that time helped out SEAL Team 10 as a task unit commander deploying overseas for 6 months. Also during that same time is when I was applying to NASA to be an astronaut, and left Little Creek in 2004 and moved to Houston where I still live, and started the astronaut training pipeline. Still active duty. People often ask me that, like, did I have to retire from the Navy to be an astronaut? Nope. We have around 45 astronauts, and roughly half of us are military, so I still have to do my fit reps. I still get an LES, and I still get dive pay, and don't tell anybody I get demo pay, but don't tell PSC. And all the normal stuff that an active duty person has to do, I do there as well. It's very common, however, for military astronauts to retire from the military and then show up on Monday as a government civil servant doing the same exact job. So a few of the active astronauts are former military but currently civilian government employees. And then the other background of our astronauts we have are, if you're not from the military, medical doctors, PhD scientists, engineers, that kind of thing. So that's the astronaut population there. Trying to think before coming here what you guys might be interested in hearing about. And one of the themes that I wanted to share with you was how similar your workups are with our spaceflight preparation. So by that I mean, at least the model that I'm familiar with, is you have kind of a 2-year cycle, right? And you've got 18 months of stuff before the deployment, and you break that 18 months of stuff up into whatever chunks you do, and then you do your deployment, and you come home and you start all that over again. Still kind of the same thing, right? We are a little bit similar, but instead, so we'll get assigned to a mission, and it's about a 2-year training cycle leading up to a 6-month stay on the space station. So that part is all very much the same, and during that pre-mission time frame, we spend a lot of time traveling, just like you guys do in your platoon workups. We go to Russia a lot, where the Russian Space Center is outside of Moscow, and we do a lot of training there. And between Houston and Russia, we're kind of moving back and forth. Then we do the 6-month mission. The only kind of difference is we don't jump right back into another cycle. There's, like I said, 45 astronauts, and we fly about 4 astronauts a year, 4 NASA astronauts a year to the space station. So you do some quick math, and you're looking at 5, 7, as much as 10 years between missions. It really works out to be about 5 or 6 years between missions. So there's a period of time when you're, like your analogy would be, you're not in a platoon but just assigned to shore duty supporting the ongoing missions. And we do the same thing. We stay in Houston, work in mission control, help out with new concepts, new spacecraft, cockpit design, new spacesuits, that kind of thing, providing operational input onto those new projects. That's kind of what we do in those spiller years before you get back to a crew. For me, personally, in the 14 years I've been at NASA, the first 2 years, you're an astronaut candidate, or short for ASCAN. Nobody wants to be an ASCAN. But it's really much like being a student, where you're in a classroom, the instructors are telling us about whatever system it is, and then we take that knowledge and go into the simulator, and they start showing you how it should work and if everything's normal, and then also show you how you should respond when things start to go bad in the cockpit and things fail and lights are going off, and how do you react, what do you do, and refine your ability to work with your crewmate, because that's the real key. Anybody can just by themselves go through a checklist and do it, but when you have to work and communicate inside a cockpit with your teammates, it's a whole different level. Just like if you're out on a dive all by yourself, you can get to where you're going, but if your buddy's screwed up and your buddy's fin strap falls off and now you're underwater and you don't know where you are, that communication between the two of you is critical at that moment in time. That's really what we focus on, is that crew interdependency on each other and how do you work together. That's the bulk of our training. So 2 years as an astronaut candidate, just really you can think of that as BUDS and STT. Now the person is qualified to be a crew member, but are they really ready to jump right in and go to space? Probably not. That's when you get assigned to your crew training and you do that process that I described to you already, and then you go execute the mission. So you get your basic qualification in that astronaut candidate period, a little bit of fine-tuning your personal skills in those follow-on years, and then really fine-tune it as a crew, as a group, prior to deployment and executing. So for me, I showed up first 2 years. My first space flight happened 5 years into my time at NASA, so there was about a handful of years where I was not assigned to a mission, but working in other support ways, like I already described, working in mission control and doing that kind of thing. And then was assigned to my space shuttle mission. Now, I've flown in space two times, once on a space shuttle and once on a Soyuz. And what are the differences between the two is something I'm always often asked. The space shuttle is, you can think of it like a big king cab Tundra pickup truck, where it doesn't have to be a Tundra, it could be a Ford F-150, but you pick your preference. But a front row and a back row, think of that as a cockpit level and a mid-deck level where you can do your work in a shirt sleeve environment. But the whole rest of the shuttle was a cargo bay, much like a pickup truck has it for cargo, but if you're driving down the highway, you can't just reach into the pickup truck and get your stuff. You got to stop and get out and access it. The analogous situation on the space shuttle is you can't just go back and get stuff out of the cargo bay. You either got to use a robotic arm and grab it, or put a spacesuit on and go out and do a spacewalk and access it. Also, the shuttle was limited to but 16 days was the limit that the shuttle could stay in space, limited by the amount of oxygen we could take in the tanks for a 7-person crew. So short duration type mission, we would go to the space station, the space shuttle would carry components of the space station in its cargo bay and deliver them to the space station, and we constructed over the course of, I should know the number, I think it's about 30 or 35 flights, we built the space station into what it is today, which is this football field size thing that you can live in and keep 6 people alive every day of the year in space. So that was my first mission. My part on the crew during that mission was largely as a spacewalker. We did, in that span of 16 days, we did 5 spacewalks to help build the space station. And spacewalks are, I consider it like going to combat with the environment. You're putting on a suit, you're in a 1-person spaceship, and you're going outside, and it's a little bit like rock climbing in that, and I have a video that it shows a little bit of it, but in rock climbing you've got your rope, and the rope's only as long as the rope is long, and if you have to go more or higher, you need to transfer ropes. I mean, I'm not an expert rock climber, and then if you want to stop and rest, you take a little short lead, right? And you clip in and you can rest your hands and rest on that lead. We do the same exact thing on a spacewalk. Our ropes are 85 feet long, but the space station is about probably 6 of those lengths. So we need to carry several safety tethers, and then when you get to some place, you don't want to let go and then fall the distance of that whole rope. So you clip in and then you can do your work. More to come on spacewalks in the video, but I like it a lot and I can easily get sidetracked talking about it. I personally did 3 of those 5 spacewalks, and then came home from that mission, did some other jobs in the office. One of them that was pretty cool was the strap-in guy for the last handful of shuttle launches. So I don't know, if you're one of like the 6 people that watch NASA television, you may have seen on launch day, there's these guys in white outfits that help the crew climb into the cockpit and then strap them in, do all the buckles, and pull out the support equipment and close the hatch immediately before launch. And that was my job for a couple of years, which, short of flying in space, there's nothing cooler than like high-fiving your buddy and like have a kick-ass mission and then closing the door and watching it go. So I did that for a handful of years just as the shuttle was retiring. And everybody's aware the shuttle doesn't fly anymore, right? You'd be surprised a lot of people in the country aren't aware of that. But so shuttle ended in 2011 or so, and shortly after that is when I started my training and preparation for a 6-month stay on the space station, but this time launching on a Russian Soyuz rocket. And that has a crew of 3, and my 2 crewmates were Russian guys, 2 Russian cosmonauts. So again, shuttle to Soyuz. Shuttle, 7-person, large cockpit area, big cargo bay. Soyuz, 3 people. The 3 chairs you're sitting in right now, put 3 of them squished together. That's about the cockpit size. No cargo. Maybe you can take a soft bag of whatever, clothing or something that they need. You can stick it under your arm or your leg or behind your head or something, but really, really no cargo space at all, and you're really cramped in there. And language, shuttle, all the training is in Houston. The guy talking on the radio is in English. The books are in English, the procedures. And on the Soyuz, it's some guy in Moscow barking off some language, so you think it's Russian and rattling away full speed in Russian. Books are all in Russian. The labels on the switches are all in Russian. So Russian language is a big part of our training, and we spend a lot of time in the simulator over there in Moscow just kind of getting comfortable with that. The biggest thing I found was numbers. And you guys have all talked on the radio a bunch, and just think about missions that you've done and somebody's rattling off bearings and distances and super fast. The number, if you're not really quick with numbers, was that a 12 or 20? Was that 1,000, 2,000, or 200? And that number has to go in your computer, so you could really screw yourself up if you write down the wrong number. So that's what I really, really focused on, was making sure I knew how to hear Russian numbers and write it down quickly and accurately. It was helpful to order beer and chicken in Moscow, but that was less important than not screwing up my numbers. So that was the big differences. Oh, the other big difference between shuttle and Soyuz, and you'll see the Soyuz landing in the video, is the actual, what I just said, the landing. The shuttle, if you can picture it, had wings and landing gear and would land on a big runway at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And I mentioned it has 2 levels, an upstairs flight deck which has windows and a downstairs mid-deck which had no windows. On launch I sat upstairs and I could see out the windows and see what's going on for the whole launch. On coming home, on entry, I sat downstairs with no windows. If I wasn't listening to my crewmates talk about altitudes and speeds, I would not have known that the main landing gear hit the ground. It was very, very soft. And then it's rolling along the runway with the nose way up in the air. The nose gear is probably 30 feet or so above the runway. And then once it slows down and there's not enough force on the wings with the wind to keep it up, it falls like about the last 20 feet or so, and the whole shuttle kind of like, and there's no doubt that you landed at that time, but very, very smooth as you come in and land. Contrast that with the Soyuz. The Soyuz is a parachute landing on Earth, on ground, not on water, but hits the ground, and you're going about 25 miles an hour as you hit. And the seat actually has this hydraulic gimbal, hydraulic piston in it, so it takes out a little bit of it. The seat liner is made of honeycomb metal, so your body squishes that a little bit, so there's some of the impact is taken up with that. And no shit, in the procedure it says, cross your arms, clench your teeth, and make sure your tongue is not in your teeth. That's what it says in Russian in the procedure, because it's a solid hit on the ground. Just imagine you drive your truck 25 miles an hour into the wall. You're going to live, but it's a significant impact. So those are the main differences, shuttle to Soyuz. Right now, with no shuttle, we as the United States of America are 100% reliant on the Russians to get us to space. And that's a kind of crappy position to be in, to be completely dependent on anybody or anything. This morning I used the analogy, imagine there's just one plumber in your town. You know, he's not going to give you a break. You're going to pay a lot for that one guy. And that's how it is with us. We pay. When I flew 5 years ago on a Russian vehicle, the price for my ticket was $57 million. That's what that's what the United States paid Russia for that seat. And now it's up to about $85 million. And we launch 4 Americans a year. So you're like $300 million, over $250 million we pay to the Russians for this, and that money is not going into the U.S. economy, or not going to Florida or anything. So we really need, for many, many reasons, we need to get past this, and we are. SpaceX and Boeing are both on contract to build a manned rocket to get us to the space station, and they think that they are briefing that they'll launch people this year in 2018. Probably not. Probably going to be 2019 sometime, but soon. We'll be out of this dependency on the Russians, and we'll be flying to and from the space station on an American rocket, launching from Florida with the American flag painted on it, the whole deal. And that will be great. That will be great to get back in that game and seeing that happen in Florida. That being said, I was pretty proud to represent the United States, the Navy, the teams on a Russian rocket. It was an experience I'll never forget, and very interesting to see the differences in how they do stuff versus how we do stuff. But again, super exciting for us inside the community to get back to having an American vehicle. So that time frame is about a year or so from now, and concurrent to all that, NASA's building a large rocket called Orion. Well, Orion is a capsule. The rocket is called SLS, stupid boring name, Space Launch System, but it's essentially a big, huge rocket like the Saturn V was, and that will ultimately get astronauts at first around the moon and then ultimately to Mars. We're not building a lander for the moon, so don't expect to see boots on the ground on the moon. That's a big discussion point. I personally think, like, why go if you're not going to walk on it? Because it was really, really exciting for the country to see people in the 1960s and early 70s to see somebody land on the moon. And it's going to be really cool to orbit at the moon again, but ultimately, we're all human and we all love human exploration just innately, and nothing beats watching through like a helmet camera of somebody looking and walking around in high-def video of walking on the moon. So that SLS and Orion system will get us flying again in probably early 2020s, and if I was a predicting guy, I would say by the mid-2030s we'll be on the surface of Mars, and we will have a landing craft for the surface of Mars, but the decision had to be made: do we invest the money to go to the moon and do it, and do it to Mars. We don't have the budget to do all of that, so we had to make the hard decision, just go to the Mars lander and don't worry about building a lunar lander. So that's where we're at, yeah.
So NASA itself is building the lander for Mars as well as the rocket to get there, or is that, are you kind of assuming that both like Blue Origin, SpaceX, etc.
So all of the Mars mission stuff will be done under NASA, and the lander part hasn't actually bent metal yet. I think that will probably be a partnership with the European Space Agency, and maybe they'll build the lander, and we are building all that other stuff. But that will all be done under NASA, kind of the traditional contract way of doing it. The commercial companies, their whole focus is on what we call low Earth orbit and getting to and from the space station. I think most people think that it's too expensive and there's no business case for a commercial company to go to Mars. Elon Musk says that he's going to send people to Mars, but at the end of the day, who is his client? It's going to be the United States government. Maybe he'll be involved in missions to the Mars, but it's not going to be some rich guy who's having dinner on his yacht today who's going to pay him a whole bunch of money for a trip to Mars, and there's really no business case for a Mars commercial company, I think. We'll see if they do amazing stuff at SpaceX, and I get surprised all the time, but we'll see if it changes. Yeah.
How long's the trip to Mars? And if they go and land, does there a plan to get back up?
Oh yeah, we would not send a one-way crew. But it's about 7 months long to get there, and the same to get back, and then you're going to do some stuff there. So you add it all up, you're kind of in for 2 years. Now, we are very excited about low thrust, constant thrust engines. So that same, if you went to Mars today, you get in the Earth orbit and then fire a big engine for a couple of minutes, and then once the fuel is used up, you just coast all the way to Mars for 7 months. And then you get in Mars orbit and you land. If you had an engine that could be on, like a nuclear-powered engine that didn't run out of fuel, that could just be on the whole time, you get about halfway there, you're accelerating super, super fast the whole time, and you get about halfway there, you turn around, and now the engine is slowing you down for the last little bit of it. And that trip gets cut down into about 5 weeks or 6 weeks. So it's significant. And that engine exists in a small little test cell in Houston right now, and pretty soon it'll fly on the space station to test it out in space, and ultimately will be a rocket engine that will get us to Mars. I really firmly believe that it's going to be hard for us to sustain anything on Mars without an engine like that. So that's where NASA's vision is getting us to Mars, and kind of in the 2020s, some lunar orbit type missions. What happens there is still kind of up to debate, but anyway, the real thrust is to get to Mars. Me personally, I did those 2 flights, landed in 2013 was my last mission, late 2013 I got home. In the last 4 years or so, 5, whatever it is, I've been more kind of management and doing just normal meetings and email type work at the Johnson Space Center. And the last 2 years I was the chief astronaut, but I handed those duties over in the summertime, and the last 6 months I started preparing for another mission. And I probably will launch in the summer of 2019. I say probably because it's right on the edge of when we transition from Russian dependency and launching in a Soyuz or a commercial vehicle. So for me, as an individual, I don't know what rocket I'll ride on my next mission, and just kind of waiting the next 6 months or so to see what sorts itself out and how I'll get there. But yeah.
Sir, do you see any working together between other agencies with other countries? So like, I can't imagine we're the only agency talking about going to Mars, but are the Russians, the Chinese, the European space agencies, is there any collaborative discussion about getting there together, or is it all independent work?
No. Going to Mars is expensive and hard, and expensive, hard things span several political and election cycles. It doesn't matter what your policies are, what your thoughts are on politics, but it's just hard when you have to span that many votes and that many changes in leadership. And so I think it's really hard for one country to go to Mars. So I don't think that you'll see 4 American people sitting in a cockpit of Orion on Mars. I think it's going to be 4 countries. One of them will sure be an American, probably a Russian, for sure a European, maybe a Japanese. You'll have those 4 countries represented in the capsule going to Mars, and each of those space agencies will be contributing to the mission in some way. The Chinese are kind of doing their own thing. We do not partner with them on the International Space Station. They have their own space station. They have their own launch vehicle, although it's a carbon copy almost to the switch of the Russian Soyuz, just with Mandarin letters on the thing instead of Cyrillic letters on the thing. And they are very methodically going to the surface of the moon. And that's what their focus is, the Chinese. I think maybe they'll eventually get to Mars, but I don't really see us necessarily, at least in the next 10 years, partnering with the Chinese to get there. Maybe it'll happen, but I don't know. So that's what I'll do. I'll probably fly in about 1.5 years or so in another 6-month mission on the station. That'll probably be my last flight in space. On the astronaut selection side, you've probably heard, so Bill Shepard was a team guy before me. He came to NASA in '84, and I got there 20 years later in 2004. And just this year, we picked another team guy, Johnny Kim, who was a corpsman at Team 3, and then went seaman to admiral, I think, and then med school, and then to Houston. So there's been 3 of us Trident wearers in the program, and we select astronauts about every 4 years. It's not a hard and fast schedule. It could be 3 years, it could be 5 years. It just depends on the number of missions that kind of we have ahead of us and how many people retire or move on, and we sort of try to do our best to balance the right number of astronauts so that you're not sitting around, because imagine a whole team of team guys waiting for a deployment that only 2 guys can go on. Eventually, how long are you willing to wait? You know, you don't want astronauts just hanging out for a decade before a flight. It's a lot to ask of a person and a family. So but you also don't want to burn people out, although it's a good problem to have. Like, oh darn, I got to go to space again. That'd be okay problem, but for us. But anyway, getting that right number of people kind of drives the astronaut selection. And what is astronaut selection? It's a paper process. Well, computer, you submit your application on USA Jobs, which is the website that if any government job that is out there, you apply for. And it goes into this. We get all those at the Johnson Space Center, and the computer goes through and puts some filters on it. Like, for instance, this last class, we had 18,354 applications that got hit submit by the end of the closing date. The computer, based on basic qualifications, are you a U.S. citizen? Do you have a bachelor's degree? And I think a minimum of 3 years work experience. If all those answers said yes, then it passed the computer filter, which spit out about 12,000 applications. And so we, as a 45-person astronaut office, had to put eyeballs on 12,000 applications. And thank God it was electronic and you could do it watching football on your couch on Saturdays and Sundays. But we just kind of plowed through all those, whittled it down to about 400 that then we really, really talked about, and then ultimately brought 150 people to the Johnson Space Center in Houston for a week-long interview. And that interview has like a normal sit-down hour-long interview, and it has medical stuff and aptitude testing and things like this. And then from that, we picked the final class, which was 12. Yeah. So that's the astronaut selection piece. And You guys got any questions about it, or we'll jump into the video after?
Yeah, so like what kind of traits make you competitive as an applicant?
Good question. Ultimately, that person has to spend 6 months in a small space with their teammates. So we look for traits that you would want to spend 6 months with that person. So teamwork, kind of just a, for lack of a better word, good guy, good person, but yet balance that with some technical skills, because you don't want just a great guy who screws up, or gal who screws up every procedure they touch, but you don't want somebody that's so technically awesome but an asshole to be around. So we kind of try to balance that. And how do you test for that? That's a challenge, you know. So the psych guys have some testing, you know, those type of scenarios where they give you some tools and you gotta get your team across the tire rope or whatever, you know, those kind of things, or cross over the 6-foot wall and you have no tools other than yourselves. So that kind of stuff with it, given a time pressure, and we try to make it semi-stressful, you know, and to see how people respond, how they work together, mix up the teams so that we see how they react with each other in a different way.
What about like to get to that initial 400? So if you're just looking at them on paper,
Yeah.
what kind of education, background experience, and whatnot is sending them to be that 400 people?
So right now, the education requirement is only a bachelor's degree. It has to be in what we call technical field, math, science, engineering, chemistry, physics, something like that. But we're probably going to put a master's degree requirement on there just because we had so many applicants last time, and we really don't see it being much less than that. You know, maybe it won't be that high, but something a little less. So we'll probably add a master's degree. And then what I looked for when I was reviewing them was what the person did outside of work. Like, you guys all have interesting jobs that, but a lot of the applicants are, I go to my lab and I test stuff, and I'm the lab lead. You know, that's okay, and it's cool, and you gotta have a job. But if that same person compared to a person that just did that, compared to somebody that had the similar job, but then also was a Boy Scout troop leader in their community and played the guitar with a local band and had more well-rounded thing to them. So I looked for kind of more of a whole person. Each of us that read them had slightly different filters, personal mental filters, but essentially it was all the same. We were all looking for somebody that had a solid education, good performance in their career, and had something else to them besides just their career, some other part of their life. And I know that because there's a lot of young team guys would reach out to me personally, because I'm a SEAL there, and ask for advice and guidance on how to write their application. And so through that process, I knew of several people that would have been really, really competitive applicants, but on paper they didn't really write it well. A couple in particular I can think of when I went back and read them after the fact. Our system takes out the name and it takes out stuff, so it's hard to know who the person is. So it's difficult to have a personal bias to, hey, John Smith is my boy, and I want to make sure his thing gets through. The computer system helps to prevent that. Anyway, so when I went back and read after the fact some of the people that I thought would have been great, it wasn't written very well, so the reader, it wasn't obvious to the reader that doesn't know about military or jargon on what the person really did. So it's important to write in normal words the cool stuff that the person does and describe what BBSS means, not just like led BBSS ops. You know, who the hell knows what that is? You guys do, that's it. So anyway, does that answer your question? I'm happy to talk more in depth after, but we'll get to the video. Yeah.
Real quick, what's the oldest applicant that you guys will accept to be an SCAN?
Yeah, that's a great question, because right now there is no age limit, under or over. You just have to meet those requirements. But in reality, do we want to pick a 55-year-old person when after they get through the basic training, they're going to not have too much operational life? So we're talking about putting about a 40 or 42 year upper boundary on it, just because historically we see people, when you get in your mid-50s, it's harder to pass the annual medical exam. So if you come in at 40, you got to get 10, 15 years of operational life in you before your body just starts doing stupid stuff. Yeah.
So you alluded to your workup kind of comparatively to ours. I know with ours it feels like a lot of time you're compressed, right? Like you have to get these training blocks done. Is it more relaxed for you guys?
It's the same. It's the same because we only have limited facilities. Like we'll train for spacewalks in a giant pool in Houston called the NBL, Nuclear Buoyancy Lab, which stands for Big Fucking Pool. And in there, only 2 guys per weekday can train. So if something happens that prevent you from doing your day on Wednesday, now the facility is booked for the next month, and unless they screw up everybody's schedule and ripples it, you miss that day. Does that make sense? So we have these big, we call them kind of like anchor training events, where you really gotta hit them without screwing up your schedule and consequently then everybody else's as the ripple effect happens. So we kind of have the same thing, and then you throw in there too, you're traveling, so maybe you're home in Houston for 6 weeks, and then if a hiccup happens with a facility or it goes down or something, and you can't get that box checked, now you're gone in Russia for another 6 or 8 weeks. Right, so that just, it all propagates into this big thing. So kind of the same thing where you got to check these boxes off as you go.
Do you see a lot of mileage wearing guys down like it does in this community? So like the guys get done with ULT, like they're pretty burned out and run down. Does it take the same toll on you guys, or being you are NASA, are you a little smarter about how the guys get taken care of?
And don't give us too much credit. We're pretty stupid sometimes. But we don't have the physical stuff going on. It's not the burnout in terms of you're just physically worn out from a tough 2-month series of road trips, but the cumulative effects of never really adjusting your sleep. So you go to Moscow for, say, 4 weeks. It takes 2 weeks to really be on that schedule. Then you come back to Houston for 3 weeks and go to Japan. It sounds all exotic and it's fun, but you're over the course of a year, you just get generally tired from always adjusting your circadian rhythm. And that's what I think burns out people the most, is just this long-term jet lag. The actual day-to-day stuff is not super fatiguing. It's generally normal work days. It's not like we have to do night boat shipboarding, you know, so we have just normal working hours once you get to where you're going. Yeah.
Can you talk about maybe some of the advantages and disadvantages you had coming from the teams into NASA versus other candidates?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've thought about that a lot. And part of that was SDV background. So I had a lot of comfort underwater, and we do our spacewalk training in that pool that I described. And so compared to my astronaut candidate, ASCAN classmates, I just really translated very seamlessly into the spacewalk training. And a lot of them struggled with comfort underwater, comfort wearing a bunch of gear, and how do you reach your stuff when you've got gear all over you. And it's just what we do, right? You got H gear and you know what pocket your widget is in, and you just know how your gear works. And that sounds very basic to all of us in this room, but to somebody who's come from a lab, it's like, oh my God, I don't know what pocket the thing is in. So that helped a lot. There's other part of the job is doing a bunch of public outreach at schools and stuff, and that was a little weird for me to go from the quiet professional thing to now being very much a public figure and going out and talking about my job, and people, especially me, because a lot of people want to know about SEAL stuff. And so when I became an astronaut is right when all the SEAL team everything was all splattered all over the news and media and everything. So he would often ask me about my, not just space, but SEAL team stuff. So that was a little bit of an adjustment for me as well. But and all in all, the operational background that we get in our community really set me up for success at NASA. We'll kick this movie off, and then we'll do more questions, but the movie's kind of interesting because it shows you what life is like on the station. Got it? Okay, so you're up there for 6 months. Maybe not completely dark, or none of these guys are going to hang with me. You're up there for 6 months, and there's 6 people on the space station. That's not good. I think it's is that washing out the thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's still one light over.
It's the light in the room behind you.
Isn't
there a light in the room?
That's exactly what it is. It's the light in the room behind.
Got it.
The door's over here.
It's your first test is consistent autopsy. Anyway, so we launched from Kazakhstan, which is like a four-hour flight from Moscow, and we go there about 2 weeks before you launch, and that's a quarantine period. Think of it like isolation prior to doing an op. It also has some medical significance, so we don't bring germs and disease up to the space station. But during that 2 weeks is when you get to climb into your actual spacecraft. Up until then, we'd only been in a simulator, which is close, but not the same as your very own spaceship. You climb in that thing, you get it all arranged the way you want, and then they close it all up, and 2 weeks later you see that thing on the launch pad out there. The rest of the 2 weeks, we're kind of hanging out, doing a little mission preparation, studying your procedures, signing some stuff. The Russians, man, I think they must sell things to finance their space program, because we would sign an hour a night. Imagine signing things for an hour. That's a lot of freaking things. But every night we'd sign pictures and stamp collector things for an hour. And about 2 days before launch, your families show up, so you can see your wife and kids or who are your launch guests for a few visits before you go. The vehicle rolls out on this rail car. They put it up into the vertical position out at the pad, which is different. In Florida, they assemble it vertically already up, and then it rolls out on this big crawler already vertical. Here's the launch structure, and then later on that same evening, this was 2 in the morning, we got our gear on and head to the pad. Your launch day is you're launching about 4 o'clock in your crew day. Even though it's just 2 in the morning, we sleep shifted so that it would feel like about mid-afternoon. So you have a lot of daytime, or a lot of awake time prior to launch, which kind of feels like you're a kid at the top of the stairs on Christmas morning, like, come on, Mom and Dad, let me come down and open my presents. You finally get to the pad, and it's really cool. You're on the van. It's completely quiet. I think of a lot like getting on a helicopter to go do an op, because you're not really talking to each other. It's just really quiet. And then you get to the pad. There's a few people. It looks like a lot, maybe 20 folks there. They put us into the elevator, ride this rickety old elevator up to the top of the rocket, and one by one we crawl in. This is all happening around 3 hours before liftoff. And during those 3 hours, the technicians are preparing the pad for it to go, and you're just kind of waiting and waiting. You have a few actions to do, but basically you're just sitting there waiting to get going. Finally, about 3 minutes before you close and lock your visor, you really can't hear anything. You stop joking around with your buddies, total laser focus on what you're about to do. And 3, 2, 1, and the rocket lights. And I was telling the group earlier, it is not like this giant push in your back where you can't move at all. It's not like that at all. You almost can't tell you're off the pad other than numbers moving and stuff happening. And that's because the vehicle is really heavy, and the thrust is calculated so that it's just enough to push it up at its heaviest point. And now you're getting lighter and lighter and lighter every second because you're burning fuel off that weighs a lot, but with the same thrust. So at about a minute into it, you're breaking the speed of sound. Now you're starting to feel the acceleration kind of pushing back. The vehicle limits itself to about 3.5 Gs, and the direction of the Gs is through your chest, whereas like in an aircraft, if the pilot of Blue Angels pulls a stick, the G-forces go through their head this way, and the blood all comes out of your head, and that's what makes people pass out because they don't have blood in their head. Our Gs are through the chest, so it just feels like a gorilla on you, hard to breathe, a little bit hard to move your arms, but you don't really feel a passing out sensation. The rocket's lit for about 9 minutes, it cuts off, and then we stair-step our way with a series of maneuvers up to the space station, such that at 6 hours from launch, we're closing in on this final approach to dock to the station. It's kind of like a video game. You can see here, looking through a periscope, you're lining up some crosshairs, you got a bunch of data on the screen that you're tracking your range and your rate at which you close, which is about 10 centimeters a second. 10 centimeters, about like that. So every second so it's not super fast, not super slow. But the cool thing is both of these things are going 17,500 miles an hour around the planet, with one of them, that one, just going a teeny bit faster to catch up. So it's kind of mind-blowing when you think about what's really happening. We're sitting over there in this compartment on the left-hand side. Right there, that's the window where my head was. This is a transfer compartment with some gear, some cargo, a little bit of cargo, but this is where the three of us are sitting. You make that docking connection, then these hooks come and grab it. You wait for everything to stabilize. You open some valves, move some air back and forth, and let everything settle out for about an hour, and then you can open the hatch and pass on through. Much like if you've ever been on a submarine, done lockout stuff, same exact concept. Instead of moving water, you're moving air, and you're equalizing pressures and doing all that kind of things. Very, very similar. Float through, and the crew on the space station, I already said, I think is 6 people, and we were 3 of us in our Soyuz. So that means there was 1 Soyuz crew already on the station waiting for us to get there. We arrived, and we bring the crew back to 6. Halfway through my 6 months' time, those other 3 guys, their time expired and they left. And that's how we rotate the crews. Kind of like you need a little handover with some experienced people, and not it'd be bad to swap out 2 whole platoons and not have any overlap or handover in theater. If you kind of the same kind of analogy. That's what it's like to float around. It's pretty freaking cool. Just imagine in this room you could push off your seat and do cartwheels and float around and zip up to the back and down here. It's hard to get used to it, actually, in your brain as an adult who's walked on your feet your whole life. It's hard to get used to the ability to just zip around. And you crash into stuff, and you can tell if you watch any footage, somebody that is relatively new, like one of the ones that you just saw me do, you knock into, your feet are all dangling out, you're knocking into computers, you're hitting stuff off the walls, and later in your mission, you're just very smoothly gliding around, effortlessly moving. But what do we do with our time up there for 6 months? Roughly a little over half, maybe 60% of it is doing some kind of science research, science experiments. We're not the smart science people. Those are teams of researchers on the ground. They put their research together, they get up on the space station, and we will activate it or turn it on or monitor it. These are like little satellites that high school kids can send up computer code to it, and we have little obstacle course races, one high school versus another kind of thing, and that was pretty fun to be a part of and watch the kids compete. Different glove boxes for whatever kind of experiment needs to be contained, something that has off-gassing, something that has fire, or something that has particulate, or whatever you want to contain it. We put it in these glove boxes, and that's how we do the science. But it's a mechanical place, just like your car or your dive rig or your gun. It all needs maintenance. And so probably another 30% of our time, 25% of our time maybe, is working on the space station, either fixing broken stuff or doing preventative maintenance. This is an example of preventative maintenance. That's the filter and the water processing system. So we recycle about 90% of our water to include piss. So you drink coffee, you piss into a thing, a bunch of rabbits and squirrels make stuff move, and it turns into drinking water. And you don't really think about it. Every now and then you're drinking water and you're like, well, wait a minute, this was coffee yesterday. But it works great. The system works awesome. It does what it's supposed to do. And that was a filter that takes all the yucky stuff out of the urine and turns it into water. We spent all of our free time basically looking out the window. It's like a 360-degree tank turret on the bottom of the space station, and you can get down in that thing and see nothing around you except this view, which is unbelievable. And to see, what I personally liked was nighttime shorelines, because people live on the coast, and that's where all the lights are, and you can really see it. It's really fascinating. We don't have a shower, just do baby wipes. You cut your hair however you want. I just found it easier to keep it short. Shaving, I like to use a straight edge, but you don't have ability to get the gunk out of the blade, so you just change the blade every day. Toothbrushing, you just swallow the toothpaste. So little stuff like that, you kind of get used to life in space. Don't really feel dirty, because it's not dirt. You're not sliding into third base at nighttime softball or anything. It's just your body oils from working out and that kind of thing. So you feel pretty clean. I already mentioned that halfway through the time we rotated out crews. So this is an Italian guy, Luca, an American, Karen Nyberg, and another Russian came up and spent the second half of the mission with us. This part of the video is about spacewalks. Here's some of our tools. Everything has to have a tether. If you let it go, it's gone forever, so you need to have it tethered to you, kind of like every piece of gear on under a ship at Norfolk or whatever. You want to have it tied to you, secured to you in some way. The spacesuit is a bunch of different components. There's not a room in Houston that has Cassidy, Smith, Jones suits. It's all different components and sizes. So when you get to the space station, the first thing you do is adjust the spacesuit to fit you. And put it together, and it's sitting on the wall ready to go. It feels like a heavy Gore-Tex rain jacket kind of material. It's all loose and floppy except for the helmet and the chest. And then once you pressurize it, it gets stiff and rigid and has its shape to it. We use these safety tethers. That's the rock climbing analogy I was telling you about. It's got a retractable dog leash kind of mechanism in there. So if you did let go and fall off with your hands, that force in the retraction reel would pull you back to where the hook is. Nobody's had to rely on that yet, but it would be a long, lonely trip back as you got reeled back in. So just the act of putting the suit on probably takes 20 minutes, but if you've ever jumped at above 18,000 feet, you know you've got to pre-breathe oxygen, right? And inside our spacesuit, we're at an equivalent altitude of about Mount Everest altitude, so we breathe 100% oxygen, and therefore we have to have a significant oxygen pre-breathe period. So that whole process takes about 4 hours to get out the door. You're doing about a 6.5 or 7 hour spacewalk, and then it takes about 40 minutes to get it off. So a spacewalk day is a long, full day from breakfast to dinner. You've got 32 ounces of water inside, no chow, so you're pretty hungry, pretty thirsty when you get back. All of my 6 spacewalks went normal except for the last one, where my buddy Luca, his spacesuit, his dive rig basically, had a problem where the cooling water system was leaking in a weird way we had never anticipated into his oxygen breathing system. So as oxygen was coming into his helmet, so was water. And it was filling up his helmet with water, to the point where it completely covered his ear cups, he couldn't hear, completely covered his mic booms, he couldn't talk, and then it kind of smeared all over his face and his eyes, he couldn't see. And by the time we got into the airlock and got the hatch open, it was close to his mouth. Fortunately for him, he had a mustache, and the mustache hairs wicked the water away from his mouth and kept his airway open. But it was pretty scary, and it took us about 1.5 years to figure out why it happened, and the reason was kind of silly. We thought we would, after each dive, after each spacewalk, we thought we cleaned the water well, but turns out we weren't, and gunk was building up in growth on the inside of the water loop and clogged the pump holes. And so water was then backing up in ways it wasn't supposed to go, and consequently got into places where we didn't expect it. We fixed it, and we're back to normal operations now with the spacesuit. Visiting cargo vehicles come all the time, because it takes a bunch of logistics to keep it going. Food, spare parts, oxygen, fuel for the engines, all that stuff has to arrive. Each space agency has their own cargo ship, so at any given time, probably once a month, we got a cargo ship coming or going, and we need to offload all that new stuff and put all our trash inside it and send it on its way. It burns up in the atmosphere, except for SpaceX. SpaceX's cargo ship lands back on Earth on in the ocean. And so if we need to return things, usually it's urine samples and blood and kind of experiment parts will come back in SpaceX, and that's how we get it back. Lots of bags. Fresh fruit and vegetables are kind of nice to get once a month. You get something fresh, like here you go. And but on that food, most of it is Mountain House style dry food. Some of it is MRE style, where you can put it in a food warmer and heat it up, or just eat it cold. Some of it is just off-the-shelf stuff: tuna fish, power bars, granola, whatever. If it's from the supermarket, it has to be that it can just stay for a long time, because once you shop for it, buy it, put it on the cargo vehicle, it's at least several months before you get access to it. Except for the fruit, they put that in the very last second before they launch. So that's like a day old, a couple days old. That's the cargo ship dying, expiry, death in the atmosphere. Off it goes. During the 6 months, if you do no exercise at all, we don't care so much about the muscles. It's about the bone strength and bone health. And so we learned that particularly squats and deadlifts and stuff for your larger muscles really keep your bones healthy. Otherwise, they deteriorate like an elderly person, and you're very, very frail when you come back. But with a good exercise program, we lift every day up there, and we've pretty much stopped the bone decay for people coming back. I think I had very, very little loss to my bone density when I got back. So 5.5 months, that Soyuz that stayed the whole time, it was our emergency vehicle if we needed to. We get back in it, bring it back to life, hit a button to separate. We separate from the space station. About 5 hours later, from this point right there, is touchdown. We separate, we loiter behind the station for about an hour and a half, just to make sure everything's healthy. And then we fire our engine on the backside there, and that slows us down. We actually turn the spacecraft around so that when we fire the engine, we slow down, and that decrease in speed is just enough to now start hitting the atmosphere. And once you start hitting the atmosphere, now you really slow down, and all of the energy that's in the spacecraft bleeds away through heat on the bottom of the heat shield. Some of that you can see out the window. That's the view, like right, if I turn my head, that'd be the view right there of the plasma on the other side of the window. And the Soyuz, as I already mentioned, has a parachute. So you tumble through the atmosphere for about 15 minutes, drogue chute opens, stabilizes you, mains open, you fall for about 10 minutes, and you can see the charring on the spacecraft right there. So it's a pretty violent action to come back through the atmosphere. There are some soft landing engines that fire at the 1 meter above. When I learned it was only 1 meter, I was like, throw a couple meters on there for good measure, but they fire at the very last second to slow you down just a little bit to help decelerate you. We had really, really nice weather in September, so the helicopters could circle around and land very soon after, so I had the luxury of getting pulled out by the recovery crews. I was telling the group earlier, I probably could have pulled myself out, but everything's very heavy. The checklist in your hands, your head, it's just, you're not used to lifting that weight. So it's really a pleasure to have somebody else to just forget about it that you're there, and somebody else reaches in and carries you out, puts you in the chair, get a quick call home, change into your clothes, and then fly on a Russian helicopter. In fact, the riskiest part about the whole damn thing isn't the fucking ride back from space. It's getting on this Russian helicopter to come back from the middle of nowhere landing to the airport, which is about a 2-hour helo ride away, where a NASA plane is waiting, and then we get onto the NASA plane and fly directly home from Kazakhstan. So about 22, 24 hours later from touchdown, I was back in my house in Houston, and then you have some post-flight medical stuff and reports and whatnot, post-mission kind of things to do. So, what questions do you guys have?
So from the time you touched down and then you were in your house within 24 hours, what does that feel like? Is that pretty weird for you?
The first hour, you're really wobbly. Like you don't want to. You're kind of like that, kind of wobbly, and people are holding your elbows. And got on that plane. We flew for 5 hours to Europe and got gas. When I got off the plane in Scotland or wherever we were, I could kind of walk like this a little bit, but still wobbly. Then we landed in Maine to get gas, and I was a little bit more sure-footed, but still not wanting to turn quickly. And it wasn't until probably 3 or 4 days later that I really felt like if you saw me walk into the room, you probably wouldn't know that I just got back from space, but in my head, I was still super cautious. And I think I went for my first run out on the road about day 8 or 9, and then fully back to normal probably 6 or 7 weeks. Yeah. And the recovery isn't muscle strength. We have that. It's working all those muscles together. Like my core right now is keeping me up, and it doesn't know how to do that. And so you're just standing in one spot for longer than 10 seconds is hard. As long as you're moving, you're kind of okay, but once you have to stand, it takes a little while to get used to that.
Prior to actually becoming an astronaut or getting accepted into the program, how long was that a goal of yours? And did you specifically do things, maybe not in your military career, but prior to that to make you more competitive?
I met Bill Shepard when I was like a lieutenant. I think while I was at grad school, so I was maybe 5 or 6 years in the teams, and I met him. Prior to that, I had no idea that you could even apply to be an astronaut. And once I met him and realized that it's just an application, I had nothing to lose but to try, then that's when I got interested in it and thought, what the heck, I might as well try. Prior to that, didn't even think about it.
Was that your first time applying? The time you got
No, I applied one time, which I would have gone there in 2000 if I got picked, and I didn't get picked. And in 2004, I got picked. Yeah.
I have one more quick question. So did you major, I think you got your master's in ocean engineering?
Yeah.
Did you select that because you thought it would make you more competitive, or you just wanted to do that?
No, it's way more complicated than that. I'm joking. I was an STV guy, and I have family in New England, and I knew that MIT had a really good underwater ocean engineering program, and I really loved, maybe I'm weird, but I really loved the mission of STVs and underwater stuff, and I wanted to continue studying that. So it was a combination of having family ties back to New England, MIT having a program in there, and knowing that with STV experience I could write a decent essay on how my experience would help me in my graduate program. So that's the simple as it was, picking that. No factor at all into plans for space or anything like that. You guys are easy. The first group had way more questions.
Is there some variety during the 2-year astronaut candidacy training as far as like when you're coming in with specific skill sets that are different than other people? So like for somebody who has a lot of diving experience, maybe you require less training on diving, more on flight, that type of thing. Is there a variety in what training you're going to have during that period?
So everybody gets the same training blocks. By nature, some people excel in one thing and require more effort in others. And so that kind of naturally sorts itself out. And the training, it's not like buds where they're trying to kick people out once you get there or not encouraging you to stay. Once you get selected to be an astronaut, all of the resources are there to make you be successful. So if you're struggling with driving the robotic arm, you can just ask for more sessions, or the instructor staff will help you tailor some lessons to, I got this part down, but this other part I'm struggling with. They'll make some special lesson for you just to get buffed up on that. But in general, the operational stuff, as I was telling earlier, the operational stuff is the foundation that's helpful for everything we do, and I found that very, very useful.
How's the relationship with the other astronauts, mainly like from the other countries?
Yeah, really good. The Canadians and the Japanese and the European astronauts moved to Houston with their families. So they live there. Their kids go to our same kids' schools, and we know them. So it's easier to have really tight bonds with people that are, just like that. The Russians, it's a little bit different. They come and go from Houston like we come and go from Moscow. And you don't know them quite as well until you get assigned to the crew with them. And the two guys that I was on my crew, in the 2 years we were training, they came to my house for dinner when they were here. I went to their house for dinner. We'd go drink vodka together, and you get this bond that makes it pretty tight for those particular guys. Now there's about 25 Russian cosmonauts. I don't know all of them super well, but I've been there 14 years now. I know every one of them. Some much more personal than the others, but some of them just like on a professional, hey, how you doing kind of thing. Yeah.
You said you got on a NASA plane very shortly after landing in Kazakhstan. Did you do any kind of mission debrief, or just keys back to management?
So the medical research people want to get the test data on you immediately. They want to know, like, at landing plus 5 minutes, how are you? At landing plus 1 hour, how are you? And the big battery of tests require like a medical equipment and stuff like that exists in Houston, MRI machines and stuff like that. So it's a kind of not a rush, but they don't want to dilly-dally in getting you back to Houston so that they can get the really detailed medical data as fast as they can. So you immediately land, you go into a tent, and we take off the spacesuit, and that's actually, I don't want to say violent, but that's probably the most disturbing event of the whole thing, is 15 minutes after landing, ducking your head under the thing and getting it off you. That's the most vomit-inducing event that there is, and it's very common to hurl all over the medical people and that kind of thing. So that happens immediately. And then there's some basic, probably 40 minutes of testing that happens in the tent where you gotta, like do drunk driver kind of tests and stuff like that. And there's videotape watching you do it. And then they do those same battery of tests at every fuel stop on the way back to Houston. So they're catching that data on how rapidly your balance is coming back, and then full medical tests when you get back to Houston. So everybody knows that it's peace out once you get to the airport, and then you come back for a more extensive debrief with the Russians like 2 weeks later, once you're kind of a little bit more normal. Yeah.
You mentioned the difficulty a little bit with learning the Russian language and whatnot and going into that. Has there been any push to kind of standardize, to have, I guess, select one language across all space agencies so everything's in the same?
In theory, that's English. English is the official language of the space station. But not all cosmonauts speak English great, and not all astronauts speak Russian great, so it ends up being this kind of hybrid Russian-English thing. The Europeans and the Japanese folks, they all speak great English. So they have a more challenge because on the public appearance events and whatnot, they have to speak Japanese 1 second, turn to their Russian guy, answer his question in Russian, and then talk to Houston in English. So it's a little bit more busy, particularly for the Japanese guys. But, yeah.
So as we're talking about some of the other partner nations, are you seeing any showing from the Emiratis?
Oh, good question. So they want to have the UAE, specifically the UAE, they want to have a manned space program, but they don't have a launch vehicle, and so they are going to contract launch services from Boeing directly or from SpaceX directly, and they want to get trained. They're like right now, as we speak, they're having a selection cycle in the UAE for UAE astronauts, and they don't know how to train them. So they are going to contract the training to take place in Houston, and I don't know when it's going to be, maybe starting in a year or something. We'll have some UAE astronauts show up in Houston and we'll train them, but they're not going to launch as a NASA person. The International Space Station is funded through 2024. And after that time, the goal is to hand it over to commercial companies to manage. And so once that happens, the UAE would like to fly their people through a commercial company to go to the space station. So I know that's a convoluted thing, but that's what the UAE has a plan for. And so it'll be interesting when they come over and start training and preparing. To me, I find it a little bit scary to have a crew of people that have never been to space before all of a sudden hand the keys over to the space station. So it's like, imagine giving a Mark V, or I just saw the, what is it, CCM, is that right? CCM or H, or I forget the letters, but I just saw that thing. Imagine handing the keys to your like teenage driver, and good luck with this thing, don't hit the pier. So anyway, it'll be interesting to see how it works out. Yeah.
One more question too. Do you see SOF also being selected for partner nation astronaut programs, just as we have some SEALs?
With other nations?
Yes.
From the other nations or Americans?
From the other nations, yeah.
So that's a great question. Kind of what I've said all through this talk is the skill set that you get in this room just by the training that you have is absolutely translatable to operations in space. And so whether other nations, as they go through their selection process, see that value, I don't know. If they ask me, if the UAE, and actually, quite truthfully, I may, in 2 months, go over to the UAE to help them with their final selection board, because I was the deputy chair of our selection board just recently, so I may do that, and I will tell them, hey, people that have an operational military background already have like been through a wicket of validation that they're going to perform for you. So I would encourage them to go. Whether they do or not, I can't answer you. Mm-hmm.
So with the push towards the private sector, do you think NASA will still retain the astronaut program?
Oh, yeah.
Or do you think they will continue to expand it and include some kind of hybrid for?
No, I think that the SpaceX will eventually hire their own company astronauts, like a SpaceX employee who's also an astronaut. They had to decide, and so did Boeing, if they were going to build a rental car or a taxi. And so by that I mean, if you call a taxi or an Uber, it comes with a driver, right? And you're just a passenger, and you say, take me to the Marriott, and you go there. But if you get a rental car, it doesn't come with a driver. You get the keys, and you drive it. So SpaceX and Boeing had to decide, are they providing the company driver, or are they having the government drive it? And they decided the latter. Right now there's no SpaceX or Boeing company astronaut. The drivers, the operators of the vehicle are going to be government NASA astronauts. Eventually, I think that'll change when SpaceX, their business plan is to start flying tourists and have been paying customers, and I think you'll see a company guy with the knowledge who is launching every month, taking rich people.
Yeah. Do you see that, will that put an additional burden on NASA?
No.
Or is that something that NASA wants to take in order to regulate and make sure that for safety procedures or even just the international space law as a whole, that it's being governed appropriately?
I think the way we see it, NASA, is if the logistics, the expense, and the burden of low Earth orbit to the space station can be taken over by commercial companies, that allows NASA to focus the resources and effort and money and training on going to Mars. And that is, it's not a competition between us and the commercial guys, it's really a partnership.
Sure.
And the governing part, I think that'll all sort itself out in time, but we don't see any threat or anything like that from the commercial companies.
Aside from the astronaut pool, are you guys seeing almost like a talent drain from an engineering perspective of guys leaving the public sector to move to private sector companies like Boeing or SpaceX, when therefore they could have worked on the engineering side at NASA, but then leaving that to go to the private sector?
No, it's different for both companies. SpaceX, I was telling the guys earlier in the day, SpaceX is kind of like Google or Facebook, where it's a young company, there's ice cream machine and a Starbucks thing and a haircut guy, and they do everything to keep the people on the campus all day long. And they do. They stay. They're all 20 years old, no families, and they just live at work, and they work their ass off for like 4 years until they realize, holy cow, this place is bleeding me dry. I've got no life. And then they leave, but it doesn't matter because there's a line of people at MIT and Stanford that are waiting to go there and work at SpaceX. So there's really not a drain on the public space world for that. That's all young people going directly to it. If anything, it happens the other way, where now that same person is 30 years old and they're married and they want to have a kid and they come work at NASA where it's normal life. Boeing is slightly different. To cover that same 16-hour period of time from 7 in the morning to whatever at night, they have 2 shifts of workers that work 8 hours. So that's how SpaceX is a little cheaper than Boeing, because to cover 16 hours, they take 2 people at Boeing, 2 salaries and 2 packages of benefits. And SpaceX, they just have 1 kid that doesn't know he should ask for medical coverage.
How does NASA support your sustainability over time? Like, if you guys have such a long duration in between missions, like, how do you guys stay at a high operational level for that time?
Yeah, we kind of don't stay at a high operational level in between. And I'm a good example. I was at my peak operations when I flew 4 years ago on the Soyuz. Very comfortable with all of it. In the last 4 years, I've been a management guy, meetings, email, just normal life stuff. And now I'm back in training, and it's not like I'm starting from zero, but I have to brush the rust off. It's kind of like if you were at the shore command and now you get your dive gear bag and you put it on in the first time, and it's not like you're a brand new guy all over again, but you gotta get your pace line down and all that basic stuff. So we kind of ebb and flow through peak operationally readiness. We keep doing a baseline set of skills, but you're not in the pool every month. You're not in the simulator every month. It's less. It's probably once every 6 months or something, just so you remember how to do the basic stuff. Does that answer your question?
Sort of. Do you guys have like a human performance program or anything like that that supports you?
So we have astronaut exercise facility, and we have strength and conditioning coaches. When I hear human performance, that's what I think of. What, like, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have human performance within that. We have strength and conditioning. We have our performance dietitian, and we have mental performance.
Yeah.
So all those different aspects.
So all of that is once a year we have our annual flight physical, which is medical, but also we see the psych team. Ever since, you probably remember the lady that put diapers on and drove to Florida to kill her boyfriend. Since then, we have annual psych stuff that we have to tag up with our psych team. It's not a bad thing. It's a healthy thing, right? To communicate and make sure that if you've got stress, we all have stress in our life. it's managing that stress in your life that's important. And so that's the mental health part. The exercise stuff is, I'm learning through my last 24 hours that you guys, it's the pace of, the way the teams are now, it's not so much a 7:30 to 9, everybody PTs as a team Monday through Friday anymore, right? It's different, and you kind of come, each det or each platoon kind of comes and goes through the, is that true? Do I have that right?
So the big push came from Admiral also a few years ago, and so many guys were retiring and are broken from like the max push-ups and pull-ups and see how far you can run type deal.
Yeah.
And that's when the human performance thing got integrated. So typically, as you see a team in Pro Dev, they'll be in HPP twice a week doing a program with them.
Tailored to the guy? Like,
so
I got a hurt shoulder, so I can't do that kind
Yeah,
of
so
thing?
that guy would go to physical therapy and work with the coach there, or you get guys who just go seek help out in general, and you'll find them in the HPP coaching area a lot, getting individual programs for their own needs.
I got you.
Instead of just thinking like I can go run 10 miles every day and do
Yeah.
200 push-ups.
Right. So we do have an astronaut gym facility, and it's a nice one, but it doesn't rival some of the stuff I've seen here. In fact, are you from, thinking you're from that group?
Yeah, on mental performance.
I think there's some kind of big physical trainer conference in Norfolk in the first week in April, and our guys are coming for that, and they actually asked me to get the contact information of you guys to cross talk. So maybe after this I'll get your information and pass it to them. But we have that human performance, but it's really kind of on your own time and based on your day, your week, you head over there and work with those guys. Yeah.
How about cognitive enhancement? Do they have, like, I mean, not sort of the remediation of behavioral health, but they have an enhancement program to help with cognitive performance, like above and beyond?
No. What they do is put us through testing when we're in space to see how bad our cognitive stuff has gotten. But I'm kind of joking, but we do monitor that because we want to know if long-term fatigue on your 6-month mission is affecting your ability to respond to emergency drills and that sort of thing.
Do they give you mitigation strategies? I mean, knowing that there probably is going to be a decrease.
I can tell I'm way out of my league here, so I'll tread cautiously, but they don't really give us mitigating strategies. If we're stressed out, we just talk to we have medical conferences once a week with the medical team, and they generally know if it's a stressful week from just being aware of the mission, and they'll ask you, hey, how you doing? You get sleep, and we have this rapport with them so that we communicate honestly about where our stress levels are, how our fatigue levels are, how, if we fucked up a procedure yesterday, are we carrying that grudge with us today, kind of thing. Yeah.
Just kind of curious what your take is on, how your family life has changed from the teams to now. Like how much time you're getting off, how much time you get to spend with family.
NASA does a really good job of family support. I have 3 kids, and they were all in elementary school when I left Little Creek. And so my oldest daughter had a bunch of elementary schools, like a typical military kid, but my youngest 2 were in kindergarten and 2nd grade when I got there, so they've only ever known one school system in Houston. In a way, I feel a little guilty that I've remained active duty and never moved in the last 14 years, but it was really good for my kids, although I personally think there's some value into changing schools and meeting new friends and moving around. But all in all, I think it's been great. The NASA astronaut community is a tight one, just like SEAL team. You got people, the guys know each other, guys and gals, and the families know each other, and there's a built-in support network that comes with that. So it's pretty good.
That was going to be my next question is, do you miss the teams at all with that whole brotherhood thing, but you kind of answered it saying astronaut?
I do. What I miss is I miss competitive PT, and that's why I'm asking everybody I see about it. But to me personally, it's much easier to push myself harder when there's 5 of us doing it and somebody else is going, is that all you got? Come on, fuck you. Than just going to the gym by myself. And maybe that's my own personality, but I like that part that we have here in our community where you can push each other and work out together. And I also miss chiefs and LPOs, and I mean that in the sense of at NASA, it's a very flat organization, and after a meeting, it's like, who the hell is going to lead this meeting and actually do shit? It's very much a whole bunch of people that are talking about stuff, and the actual doers are scarce. Whereas here, it's like, hey guys, if we do this before, as soon as we're done with this, we get to go home, and next thing you know, it's 13:30 and you're home. So that part of the team, the platoon life, that everybody's doing it. You got a group of nucleus of people making a decision, and then stuff happens like crazy. I miss that a lot because I often think, man, we just spin our wheels with meetings at NASA, and how are we ever going to get anywhere? Yeah. Yeah.
So, forgive my ignorance, or maybe how I word this.
All right,
What is the in-state goal of doing things like going to space and the moon and Mars? Like, what's the drive behind that? What's the why?
That's a good question, and somebody asked a similar question earlier today. This is just Chris, my personal answer is that in 1969, when Neil and Buzz landed on the moon, it brought the whole world together to black and white grainy TVs and radio sets on excitement that human beings were setting down on someplace other than Earth. And how exciting was that? And to think about going to Mars as not just one country, but probably 4 countries represented in one capsule, going to Mars and touching down when everybody's got a cell phone that they can watch it live, they can tune into the live streaming audio of, all right, 100 feet, 40 knots, 80 feet, 20 knots, 15 feet, 10 feet, 5 feet, touchdown. That moment in time is going to be amazing for the planet, for the people of Earth, to all come together and be jazzed about it. And I'm not trying to get rah-rah about it here. I'm just saying I think that will pull together a lot of people on Earth for a common goal of getting there, particularly with multiple countries represented in the capsule. So that's why I'm excited about it. The secondary effects are it spreads jobs to technology development and yada, yada, yada. But that national pride that comes with it, like, we put people on Mars, that's pretty cool. And I think that's one of the key fundamental things. It's hard to monetize that on the value, it's sort of touchy-feely. And what's the value of that? I don't know. How do you know? $1.37? I don't know. But it's got some value to it that pulls people together. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I feel about it. Well, I know you guys got probably places to go. I'm happy to. I'll stand here and answer questions personally and see old faces as you guys go. But thanks for coming. I appreciate your time, and thanks for doing your missions. We got all teams represented here, or is like Team 10 the only people that could come? Or,
Team 4.
Team 4. Cool.
Team 3.
Team 3. All right. West Coast guy. Any more questions? I mean, fire away. I'm not kicking you out, but I'm sensitive to your afternoon.
I got one that's a little bit off. So what do you think about this flat Earth movement that you gotta have an opinion on? How do you deal with something like that? Have you met anyone in your travels?
I haven't met anybody that believes it, that's asked me it in person. We talk about that in our office, just like, did you get any goofball questions? And that comes up periodically, and all you can do is just tell them, hey, I orbited the Earth, and I know that I just didn't instantaneously go back to the other side and go flat again. So I don't know. They got what they believe what they believe, but it's a little goofy. Yeah. A lot of people think it's a conspiracy that we went to the moon. That's another one. That we really didn't go, and it was a studio and movie set type of thing. But you just give them as much facts as you can and tell them, hey, we got rocks in the lab that you're welcome to come to Houston and look at them and see them, and they got there somehow. So, yeah. Thanks, guys. Kick ass on your mission.